Hey there everyone, this is Xith, back with the second part of my two-part series covering every ruler of the Septim dynasty. We've got plenty of famous and infamous rulers to cover in this one, so strap into your seats and let's explore the twisted fates of these emperors. In the last video, we covered the unlikely Dunmer Empress Kataraya and how she fared after the death of her husband and Emperor Pelagius the Mad. Kataraya faced hardship and questions of legitimacy as the only non-septim on the throne, but she managed to make the best of her reign. During her reign, she gave birth to Cassynder and Uriel Septim IV, and after her death, Cassynder Septim was in line to inherit the Ruby Throne, which is who we'll be covering next. Cassynder Septim became the 14th ruler of the Septim Empire upon the death of his mother Kataraya in the year 200 of the Third Era, and he ruled until the year 202. Cassynder inherited the throne as a frail middle-aged man, and the reason why it was so short was due to his poor health. He was somewhat forced to accept the position of emperor due to his relation to Cephorus Septim, even if he struggled with health-related issues. As soon as he assumed the throne, he formally adopted his half-brother Uriel Lariat into the Septim dynasty and granted him rule over Hierarch, simply because he couldn't invest any more mental energy than he already had. He died only after 2 years of ruling, allowing for the newly adopted Uriel Lariat to assume the throne and rebrand himself as Uriel Septim IV. Uriel Septim IV became the 15th ruler of the Septim Empire in the year 202 and ruled until the year 246. His arrival on the throne was met with staunch resistance from the Elder Council, as they did not consider him a true heir with the blood of a Septim. As we know, he was the son of a Breton nobleman called Galiver Lariat and former Dunmer Empress Kataraya, who were both either loosely or not at all related to Cephorus Septim. Uriel Septim IV was immediately isolated from the council, and they were at constant odds during his 43-year reign. And even though the Lariat family were respected distant cousins of the Septims, they still viewed his claim as weak, and this bred a lot of disrespect and disloyalty within the Elder Council. His reign proved to be difficult and long, constantly battling the Elder Council, which hindered him from ushering in any real change within the empire. The reforms of former Emperor Pelagius Septim II that allowed only those who could pay a hefty sum to join the Elder Council didn't really help his cause. This is partly why the Elder Council consisted of only the wealthiest noblemen and women. But the source of why the Elder Council held such immense power by the time he stepped onto the throne was a culmination of things, but the main reason derives from Kataraya and Cassynder. Both Kataraya and Cassynder allowed for the council to assume too much responsibility during their reigns, leading to even more personal wealth and power amongst council members. Later into his reign, the council's last act of resistance was to disinherit his son, Uriel Septim, from the throne, and they eventually succeeded at this. Not even a few weeks after his death in the year 246, the Elder Council voted in a new emperor, finally ending years of petty politics. Cephorus Septim II became the 16th ruler of the Septim Empire shortly after Uriel IV's death in the year 247, and he went on to rule until the year 268. The beginning of his reign was quite turbulent, as he was thrust into conflict after conflict, firstly internal and then external conflict. The main issue he encountered for the first 9 years of his reign was opposing forces that were led by and supported Uriel IV's son Uriel Septim, and his entire insurrection concluded with Cephorus II finally giving in and granting him the kingdom of Shornhelm in the province of Hierarch. During this civil dispute, an even fiercer opponent was waiting to take a bite out of the once indestructible empire, and this opponent was known as the Cameron Usurper. The Cameron Usurper was presumably a lich and laid waste to kingdom after kingdom with his armies of the undead and Daedra, proving once and for all that the empire isn't as glorious as people claimed. Cephorus misjudged the power of the usurper and thus only sent mercenaries into Hammerfell to stop their northward march. And these mercenaries were either bribed or converted into the undead to serve the Cameron Usurper further. At this point, the Imperial army had been seriously weakened by the civil war with Andorak, so Cephorus had little power to stop him. Prior to Cephorus II, mostly all of the emperors were of Breton descent, which made things even worse because Cephorus was the only confirmed Nord to ever rule over the Septim Empire. This is why the predominantly Breton kingdoms of Hierarch were less inclined to rally to his cause, and due to not having a patriotic cause to rally to, the kingdoms of Hierarch were highly scattered and lacked alliance, giving the usurper an even bigger advantage. Regardless, some of the kingdoms of High Rock managed to amass a large naval fleet to meet the usurper's forces and succeeded in an otherwise losing battle due to what seemed like divine intervention. The defeat of the usurper by the hands of the regional kingdoms is what led to even more separatism, and much of the nobility pointed out how ineffective the empire was in defeating such a threat. All of these doubts are what sprung up many rebellions for decades to come, marking Cephorus II's reign as a rather catastrophic one. He was succeeded by his son Uriel Septim V. Uriel Septim V became the 17th ruler of the Septim Empire in the year 268 and ruled until the year 290. Uriel V's ascension to the throne was a mighty one, for he sought to turn the attention away from petty internal conflicts and start expanding the territories of the empire even further. He rose to the title of a great warrior, second only in comparison to Tiber Septim at one point. He also spent most of his time away from the imperial city conquering land for the empire, an activity that would eventually become his downfall. His series of invasions proved to be beneficial at the start when he started to conquer islands in between Tamriel and Akavir. The first island to fall was Roscria in the year 271, then the island Cathnoke in the year 276. After that, he managed to conquer Yeneslia in the year 279, and finally the island of Esroniet in the year 284. Eventually, Uriel V grew too complacent and started planning to invade the continent of Akavir, which was an egregiously bold move. The imperial invasion of Akavir began in the year 288, but it wouldn't be until 2 years later when he met his untimely demise at the hands of the Tsaisi in the Battle of Ionith, which would be named the Disaster at Ionith. Luckily, he fathered children by the name of Uriel, Eloisa, and Morihatha before his death. His son Uriel VI was crowned the new emperor at just 5 years of age, but his mother Thonica ruled as empress regent until he came of age. Uriel Septim VI became the 18th emperor of the Septim Empire in the year 290 and ruled until the year 313 of the Third Era. He was technically crowned at a very young age of 5, but his mother and imperial consort Thonica was given restricted regency to rule in his stead until he came of age in the year 307. From the start, Thonica and the Elder Council were hesitant to lay over public rule to Uriel VI because they enjoyed reigning over the empire themselves, but he was eventually given the ability to publicly rule. By the time he came to rule himself, the Elder Council again had all of the power and gave him little to no room to rule freely. The only real power he had was that of the veto. He used his power of the veto to cripple the Elder Council by reviving obsolete networks of spies and units loyal to him, which would then bully and coerce specific members of the Elder Council that opposed him. This was an ingenious way of handling the rapid and unprecedented growth of the Elder Council, which effectively stomped out their will to oppose emperors for years to come. Many credit and revere his father Uriel V for his militaristic achievements, but his son Uriel VI is known for taming the unstoppable Elder Council. He died in the year 313 due to a horse riding incident, with some of the top imperial healers not managing to pull him out of death's hands. Even though this isn't confirmed, I believe his death was most likely a form of revengeful assassination due to the notorious reputation he had amongst council members. He was succeeded by his sister Morihatha, who stood by his side and helped him in his attempt to subdue the Elder Council. Both of them successfully managed to end the unrivaled dominance of the Elder Council that existed since the time of Pelagius Septim II. Morihatha Septim became the 19th ruler of the Septim Empire in the year 320 and ruled until the year 339. He succeeded her brother Uriel VI after his horse riding incident and was as capable and intelligent as him. She was a quick learner and did much for a slowly disintegrating empire. Her deeds included bringing in a well-known archmagister from Skyrim called Wellock to the imperial city and proclaiming him the second official battle mage of the empire. Another deed of hers was commissioning a second edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire. Besides that, her fair, judicial, and intelligent mannerisms are what slowly brought the reputation of the Empire out of the gutter. We also remember the turmoil that the former Emperor Cephorus II brought into the Empire, and Morihatha made it her goal to restore the Empire's former glory by quelling various rebellions and taking back traitorous states. And as she did all of this in a deliberate manner, always making sure to properly coordinate her next move. This deliberate and slow militaristic maneuver might have yielded very successful results, but the Elder Council were still frustrated with it, leading to slight internal disdain for the Empress. Sadly, the Elder Council would, once again, be the reason for this ruler's demise, for an Argonian council member named Thoricles Romus felt angered by the fact that she refused to send troops to the lands of Blackmarsh to presumably quell or aid a rebellion. This council member was later tried and executed, even though he claimed innocence until his last breath. Morihatha's sister Eloisa died of a foul fever years prior, and because she had no children, Eloisa's son Pelagius Septim IV assumed the throne after her death. Pelagius Septim IV became the 20th ruler of the Septim Empire in the year 339 and ruled until the year 368. He assumed the throne as the closest heir to the former Empress Morihatha. As Morihatha's nephew, Pelagius IV strived to live up to his aunt's legacy by slowly recapturing rebellious vassal states, but this venture proved less successful than when his aunt attempted it. Pelagius IV's continuous efforts translated into a prosperous 29-year-old reign, a reign which brought Tamriel closer to unity than was seen since the reign of Uriel Septim I. His son Uriel Septim VII succeeded him shortly after his death. Uriel Septim VII became the 21st ruler of the Septim Empire in the year 368 and ruled until the year 433. This emperor signifies the beginning of the end of the Septim dynasty, and a lot could be said about this figure. I already made a full video essay on the life of Uriel Septim VII, and if you want to learn more details about his personal life and secrets, be sure to watch that video. Link is in the description below. Now moving on, legends claim Uriel Septim VII inherited traits from his predecessors which would all contribute to his initially successful rule. He had quote-unquote the diligence of his great-aunt Morihatha, the political skill of his great-uncle Uriel Septim VI, and the military prowess of his great-grandfather Uriel V. During his ascension to the throne, Tamriel was in the midst of a long process of complete unification, and the early years of his reign were dedicated to bold militaristic moves in Blackmarsh and Morrowind. These new aggressive policies warranted a bigger display of power, which brought a certain imperial battle mage called Yegar Tharn into the mix. Uriel benefited from the magical finesse Yegar Tharn presented, and he formed a close bond with him in turn. Uriel had surpassed the prowess of his predecessors, bringing further justice and fairness to Tamriel, but regardless of his agile and young mind, his fairness was abused by his closest advisor. Yegar Tharn, in the peak of Uriel's career, imprisoned him in a plane of oblivion and proceeded to impersonate him publicly. This period would be known as the Imperial Simulacrum, when all of the newly mended relations with the many kingdoms of Tamriel started to dwindle once more. As Yegar Tharn impersonated Uriel VII, he damaged relations and remained stagnant on the various issues that were arising throughout the empire. Uriel aged much slower in his plane of oblivion, and his time there was filled with recurring nightmares. Eventually, the Eternal Champion intervened in the year 399 to rescue him from his 10-year slumber. With Tharn defeated, Uriel once again ruled over Tamriel, but this time much more cautiously and pessimistically than before. It's as if time in oblivion scorched all traces of his young and overly ambitious mind, leaving him to govern from the sidelines, rarely ever stepping out to show himself in a bold manner as he did before. He did this by utilizing the various branches of the Blades and handled political affairs through coercion and manipulation. This new cautious tactic worked in his favor, for his two main achievements after the death of Yegar Tharn were the Warp in the West and the successful colonization of Vardenfell. With the Warp of the West clearing up the petty squabbles of the Iliac Bay, he turned his attention to Morrowind, where he managed to colonize Vardenfell and increase the sphere of imperial influence. He did this by taking advantage of the rapid collapse of tribunal cults and introducing the pantheon of 9 divines into the regions of House Halalu and other districts. Not to mention that his plan of colonizing was preceded by the act of introducing the Nerevari into Morrowind, which is what allowed for the collapse of the Orthodox tribunal religion. This all proves the genius of this man. Successfully executing such a task requires much more than finesse. His divine blood surely played a factor in all of this, since we're led to believe he had dreams that have foretold certain events. He married one Kala Voraya earlier in his life, and he had 3 sons with her. His other 2 sons were bastard children, both birthed by separate mothers. By the end of his reign, he was faced with the wrath of the mythic Dawn, who were hell-bent on erasing any traces of the Septim bloodline. All of the sons that Empress Uriel birthed had been assassinated so far, and upon hearing these news, Uriel VII was swiftly evacuated out of the imperial city. Although attempting to flee, he knew his impending doom, and thus confided in one prisoner that he had nightmares of long ago in Tharn's Plane of Oblivion. The prisoner then soon finds out about the last living heir of the Septim Empire, Martin Septim. Martin Septim became the 22nd ruler of the Septim Empire amidst the Oblivion Crisis in the year 433 of the Third Era, and ruled until the memorable sacrifice that marked the end of the Third Era. Martin Septim was the second bastard child of Uriel Septim VII and spent all of his life hidden from his true identity. This is partially why he survived the onslaught of the Mythic Dawn, as they did not know of this unofficial heir. Martin Septim was a priest of Akatosh in the town of Quach and was finally informed of his true potential and protected from the Mythic Dawn assassins. As we witness in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, Martin eventually breaks the Amulet of Kings that bound the Septims to the throne, and sacrifices himself to transform into an avatar of Akatosh. His new temporary form would then be the final nail in the coffin for Mehrunes Dagon, as he tried to crush the Imperial City and Tamriel alike. Martin Septim didn't rule for long, but he definitely made an everlasting impact on Tamriel itself by permanently closing the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion. Martin was personally a figure of great potential, especially as an emperor. He was described as humble, brave, and compassionate, treating everyone equally and minding not to upset an already scattered province as his claim to the throne became stronger. He displayed no hesitation to come to the defense of Bruma even if he had no prior training in rallying an army or even fighting a battle. But most importantly, he was selfless, a trait every emperor should aspire to have when taking up the rule of a nation so diverse. One thing that plagued Martin were his vast insecurities, and this doesn't come as a surprise due to the life he was suddenly thrown into, often thinking little of himself in face of such danger and responsibility. His death was the ultimate sacrifice, and he assured that the people of Tamriel won't ever be susceptible to such a widespread slaughter from the Gates of Oblivion ever again. We finally made it to the end of the series on the Septim Dynasty and its rulers. Thank you very much for watching, and I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you learned anything new that I may have missed, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Besides that, considering that I spent a lot of time writing and creating this video, I'd appreciate any sort of support, whether it be in the form of a new subscriber or just a comment. Anything helps me get these videos out to a broader audience. Now, to wrap it up, reading through the lore gives us a great insight into the complexity of each and every dynasty, but the Septim Dynasty shines through due to its everlasting attempts to resurrect the greatness of their founding father, Tiber Septim. These dynasties were always in the spotlight, which made them and their successors prime targets of the public. Ruling for an entire era is in and of itself an achievement to behold, but it is always interesting to see how long such notorious royalty can endure in the face of resistance and indifference. In the end, the Septim Dynasty assuredly shaped Tamriel into a safer place with the sacrifice of Martin Septim at the end of the Third Era, and they stand as a testament to what benevolent and selfless rulers can do for the prosperity of an entire nation.
The last of the Septims passes now into history. I go gladly, for I know my sacrifice is not in vain. I take my place with my father and my father's fathers. The Third Age has ended, and a new age dawns.